Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Publications, a webinar series hosted by the Candler Foundry here at Emory University's Candler School of Theology. The Candler Foundry is designed to bring opportunities for rich theological learning beyond the walls of the seminary, making them accessible and engaging for everyone. In that spirit, we're here tonight for this webinar. This webinar series features discussions of newly published academic works and invites the broader public, which would be you, into the important conversations that these books engage. My name is Krista Lee, and I'm the creative producer for the Candler Foundry, and I'm also your Foundry moderator for this evening. And I just want to welcome you all to this exciting and wonderful webinar. So, what we're all here for tonight. Today, we're discussing Dr. Noel Erskine's book, Black Theology and Black Faith. This book contends that the Black religious experience emerged and unfolded in the Caribbean and South America, not in the United States of America. It recenters the voices of the marginalized in their theology and calls us all to a faith more alive to God's call to institute his kingdom here on earth. And with us today, I'm so excited to say we have the author, Dr. Noel Erskine, and three distinguished panelists, Reverend Dr. Kevin Muriel, Reverend Dr. Nichole Phillips, and Pastor Cameron Cunningham. So first, we're going to get the opportunity to hear from Dr. Erskine, to learn a bit more about his book, the insights that he has to share, and then we're going to have a roundtable discussion with these panelists. Now, this won't be an academic discussion, but think about it as if you're getting to sit down with the author and three close friends and just hear more about how we've gotten here today with this academic work. And at any point, you all, the audience, can also ask questions. We have a chat feature. You can submit your questions there, and you will be able to have these questions answered towards the second half of our webinar. So now I'm excited to introduce you all to tonight's author, the Reverend Dr. Noel Erskine. Please join us on screen. The Reverend Dr. Noel Erskine is the Professor Emeritus of Theology and Ethics at Emory University's Candler School of Theology. He came to Candler in 1977 and has been a visiting professor at 10 schools in 6 countries. His research interests include Caribbean and Black theologies, the history and development of plantation and Black churches, and theological method in the work of James Cone, Karl Barth, Paul Tillich, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dr. Erskine has authored and edited 12 books, all of which chronicle the historical and complex nature of Black theology, revivalism, Rastafarianism, and the theological perspective of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Erskine, I'm honored and humbled to have you here this evening, and we're just excited to hear from you. So can you just take a few moments to share with us, after 40 years of serving in higher education and scholarly research, how did we get here today with this book?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and panelists and friends. The community from which I write is the church. And I hasten to mention that for me, this is a Christian church. I add Christian church as I recall that Dr. Du Bois in the Negro Church and the Souls of Black Folk noted that the Black church in the Caribbean and the American colonies was not at first a Christian church, but an African church, with healers of the sick, interpreters of the unknown, comforters of the sorrowing. And in another iteration in the Caribbean, Jesus was understood in our churches as one of the spirits. For some of us, Jesus was a favorite spirit. And if Jesus did not answer our prayer in a timely way, we would appeal to other spirits. I did not plan to say this when I began to think about the Christian church in which I was raised. But Dr. Du Bois got it right. Much of this was also true of the church, the Baptist church, in which I was raised as a child in Jamaica. I was born in the bosom of the church. My mother was the organist and my father was the preacher. I sung on the choir at age 12 and was baptized at age 14. I live much of my life as pastor and a theologian in this church, taking seriously both the context and the community called church. With this expansive view of church, it should not surprise you that much of Black theology and Black faith enjoins a conversation inside and outside of the church, and not only asks within the church, what must we do to be saved, but also asks the church, in the language of my teacher Paul Lehman, what is God up to in the world? Black faith, as Black people's experience of God, engages the world as it listens to the cries that come from persons who are trapped in mass incarceration. Black faith listens to the cries of immigrants at the borders and discover what God is up to in the world makes sense only in the church. Much of this book is about listening to the biblical text. In terms of a method that informs this book, we could say that as we seek to make sense of what God is up to in the world, a lively conversation ensues between the biblical text and the contemporary context. As we listen to the biblical text, we hear Jesus reminding us about what God is up to in the world. Listen to Jesus in Luke 4:18-20. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Jesus made it clear that God's mission in the world is liberating victims. The biblical text invites us to join God in God's work of liberation. Faith listens. Faith listens to God. Faith listens to ancestors. Faith also listens to children. In chapter 7 of Black Theology and Black Faith, Karina Ray, who is 9 years old, asks his mother, "Mom, can I roll down the window and yell, 'Black Lives Matter'?" Faith yells, "Black Lives Matter." What would it mean for you that faith sings, faith dances, faith hopes, faith listens, faith prays? Black theology and Black faith is written with a prayer that you listen for the divine. As you listen to the divine, may you believe in yourself, always remembering that God believes in you. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Dr. Erskine. Thank you so much. And I hope that tonight is an evening of listening as well, to each other as we talk more about this book. So now I'm going to invite tonight's panelists to join me on screen. First, we have the Reverend Dr. Nichole Phillips. She's the Associate Professor in the Practice of Religion and Society and Director of the Black Church Studies Program at Candler School of Theology, a sociologist of religion and public theologian. She teaches courses in the community and congregational studies. Her research interests lie at the intersection of religion and American public life, with a focus on community and congregational studies, where she investigates the moral commitments and vision of the community and congregational members. Welcome, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you so much, Krista.
You're
Hello,
welcome.
Dr. Erskine.
And now we will introduce the Reverend Dr. Kevin Muriel. Dr. Kevin Muriel currently leads over 7,000 members as the senior pastor of Cascade United Methodist Church, a multi-site ministry that includes campuses in Midtown and Southwest Atlanta, Georgia. He is a biblical scholar and one of the leading visionaries and orators of this generation. A native Mississippian, he's a 2008 graduate of Jackson State University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in business administration, also being named as the 2008 Student of the Year for the College of Business. Dr. Muriel received his Master of Divinity degree from Emory University's Candler School of Theology and his Doctor of Ministry degree from Duke University. He was named by the Dean and Doctoral Committee of Duke University as the degree marshal of the 2014 doctoral cohort, the youngest person and first African American in the program's history to receive such a designation. Welcome, Dr. Muriel.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Good to see you.
And last, we have Pastor Cameron Allen Cunningham. He's a dynamic preacher, religious educator, and social advocate. A Cincinnati, Ohio native, Cameron aims to create a more equitable society by utilizing faith as a unifying tool to build stronger generations. Cameron is a 2019 graduate of Morehouse College and a 2022 graduate of Candler School of Theology. Cameron serves as the 5th senior pastor of Smyrna World of Life Baptist Church, a Bible-based, Christ-centered, and Holy Spirit-led congregation in Northwest Atlanta, dedicated to knowing and making Christ known. Good evening and welcome to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So first, for this panel, I just want to know what insights from this book are most significant to you for the church and our world today, and why?
You're asking the panelists?
Yes, I'm asking the panelists.
Well, I entered the conversation actually familiar with Dr. Erskine's work on Plantation Church, and I think that it is serendipitous that we are talking about Black theology and faith when these last 2 weeks in my Intro to Black Church Studies class, we were talking about his Plantation Church. And so I see this book as a continuation of Plantation Church, which Plantation Church is more comparative historical, very much theological, but more comparative historical and anthropological in terms of thinking about the Black faith and Black experience. And Black theology and Black faith fills in the comparative historical context from Plantation Church with a more, if you would like to say, systematic theological rendering of Black faith and the Black experience, exactly in the same way he does it in Plantation Church. This connection between the Black faith and Black experience in the United States of America with the rest of, with the African diaspora, but particularly the Caribbean and South America. So the work is important with respect to centralizing the Black experience, the Black community, Black religious experiences as central to understanding Black faith, but more than understanding Black faith, speaking a word and enacting liberation, recognizing that the Black religious experience and Black faith experience is more than enough for us to use what we have in order to really seek after and aspire to liberation.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Muriel?
Thanks so much, Krista. And let me just say, Dr. Erskine, I would truly venture to say that every person thinking about speaking on Black liberation theology needs to have this book in hand. It is that powerful. It has really changed and transformed my perspective on my preaching and even my teaching of Black liberation theology. And so let me just first say thank you for the courage to write this work, because this book will be in the hands of generations of us who dare to take on the great challenge and charge of leading God's people. So first, thank you. I'm in a sermon series right now in our church called Our Native Land. And Dr. Phillips, one of the things I wanted to do is to put this book into every hand of my every hand in my church, especially as you know, we're centering the voices of our African brothers and sisters within the biblical context. But rarely do we talk about, I think, in the church, how the Caribbean shaped and formed our understanding of who we are as Black people in this world, especially those living here in these yet to be United States. One of the things that stood out to me early, and Dr. Erskine, I'll tell you, I would read your book while I was in the gym. It was kind of my this was my meditation time on the treadmill, and I found myself walking longer because I was reading more off the pages. But one of the things that really stuck out to me early on was when you talk about how the New Testament was first translated into the Jamaican language, into Patois.
Yes.
And how people heard God's voice differently.
Yes.
Because you could hear it in your own language.
Yeah.
That, to me, it was so powerful, and so it raised the question: how do we hear God, and are we hearing the authentic voice of God if we can't hear it in our own our own tongue, our own language? And then this, when you just named it, and you said here to have the word of God in the language of the masses of people. This is in chapter 1, rather than in the language that is comfortable for the seminary trained preacher, was extraordinary. And this is what grabbed me, as it called into question the colonial strategy of domination. And I think there is where many of us, especially on the ecclesial side, are really wrestling. Well, how do we guide our congregations in the West to think about the Bible we're reading, the theology we're teaching, and how that lines up over and against this colonial strategy of domination that has been taught, that has been drilled into generations of preachers and leaders for centuries. And so I could go on and on, but I just want to say thank you, really. But that's what really stuck out to me initially.
If I may jump in just for a moment, one strategy, I think, in terms of reading the Bible in our own context is learning afresh to listen to the ancestors. You know, I'm taken with, is it the 5th commandment, you know, where we're reminded to honor our mothers and our fathers. And I've been doing that a lot, listening to people like J.D. Otis Roberts, you know, who talks a lot about his mother, saying he would often hear his mother talking about Christian race so hard to run. And then he would talk about his own struggles and how in the end he found, because of wrestling with the Bible, he found the cross of Jesus to be a healing cross. And what ancestor D. Otis Roberts said is that it's so important to listen to the Bible and to listen to the ancestors, and somehow to learn that the cross, our cross, becomes the cross of Christ when we share with others. And I was explaining to my wife, I was saying, I see afresh why we need the church and we need the community, because you cannot be a Christian by yourself. you are called with others
Yeah.
to follow Christ. You're not called solo to follow Christ. You're called with others in the community. And it's as we listen to each other and are there for each other that the cross of Christ becomes our cross. That somehow we get to share together. So I think it's so important to listen to the ancestors. Remember your mother and your father. Remember to honor them. And when we honor our teachers who are gone and our elders who are gone, we are honoring the ancestors.
Thank you, Doc.
Amen. I was sharing with Dr. Erskine that my family is actually from Grenada. And I was like, to your point, Dr. Muriel, I said, I just want to buy this book and give it to all of them to read, especially the section on colonial theology and the way that is just embedded in the way that we see and understand God. But before we delve more into that, Pastor Cameron, do you have any insights that you'd like to respond to?
Yes, well, good evening to each and every one of you, and to Dr. Phillips, to Dr. Erskine, Dr. Nichole, good evening as well. Thank you. Pleasure to share the stage with you tonight. Dr. Erskine, in this clarion, in this clear work that I have taken time to dive into in bask on and devotion, even on Sunday morning, time and time since it's arrived at my home, I've been drawn to the insight of faith and life,
Yes.
opposed to faith and reason. And I've been drawn to the importance of lived experience and to the importance of how it is through praxis that we actually experience God. And as you said in your introduction, when we think about faith, Black faith thinks, Black faith prays, Black faith sings, Black faith dances, and Black faith leads to a praxis that is transformational. So even as I read this text as a pastor of a church in Northwest Atlanta, where you can go roughly 16 miles north and see approximately $43,000 salary difference, median difference, I put lived experience forefront. And even as I read the context of not only Black people in the United States, North America, but also the Caribbeans, even in the native land, I thank God for the continuity. The continuity bounds us all together, and that bounds us through struggle as well. So, been pondering on those insights from your text.
Thank you.
Dr. Erskine, there is something we've now started talking a bit about Jamaica. And so there's one section from your book that I really have to ask about. You were writing about sitting in class and you asked James Cone a question. And you said, what does Black theology have to do with Jamaica? And his immediate response, you just put nothing, period. And so my immediate question, I was like, I really want to know from him what was running through your mind. So of course we can read in the chapter about how Cone's theology of that, shifts over time. But can you just share with us? Can you just bring us to that moment and
Yes.
center us there for a moment?
Thank you so much. That takes me back to the beginning. I think it was like the second class I was in with James Cone, and he, in his inimitable charismatic style, was pacing the floor, and gesticulating and talking about Black theology. And it was Black theology in America. And I had just come from Jamaica, leaving 5 churches down there, came to study with Cone. And so I couldn't help raise my hand and ask. I said, what does Black theology have to do with Jamaica? And he yapped at me, nothing. But it shows how important questions are, because he had never thought about that. He really never thought about Black theology outside of America. And I know that for years he struggled with it. I think it was shortly after he got an invitation through some of my contacts to lecture at the university in Jamaica, in Kingston. And I wasn't there, but he tells me that about halfway in his lecture, half the gathering walked out, half of the people walked out because he was talking about God is black. And Jamaicans knew better than that. They didn't believe in any God being black. And so he returns to Union Theological Seminary and began intentionally now to engage the third world, to engage the Caribbean, to engage Africa, to engage different places in the diaspora, Latin American theology, and so on, and then writes this essay on Black theology and the third world. You know, and one of the things that he said that intrigues me, he says, and I think he mentions it in Black Theology, a liberation of Black theology, a liberation theology. He says that one of the problems with African Americans, he said, is African Americans are tempted to treat people in the third world the way white people treat them in America. It's very interesting, you know? And so Cone begins, you could see that shift, you know, begin to really wrestle with what it means for this relationship with folks in North America and folks in the Caribbean. And so that's why I take time to point out that the Black experience began south of the border. You know, first slaves came like 1501, according to Eric Williams from Columbus to Castro. And so part of the passion of this book is really to help us to hear each other and to discover that we have so much in common and that we're not so much apart as we tend to think we are. You know, so that was a fascinating thing with me and Cone at that point.
So can I jump in here? So the book is your book. So like I said, I think Plantation Church is part 1 and this is part 2. It is a for some would be it's a hard model to accept. I see what you're doing in that you are talking about Black church history that connects the U.S. to the Caribbean, and it dislodges how we understand America or the Americas. So you are rooting the birth of Black church history in a new world experience that embraces or includes the Americas. And I point that out because we talked about it today in class, because I was I love what you say about wanting to move beyond a nation state orientation of Black church history that on U.S. soil was tied to legality and tied to really defining personhood and devaluing Black bodies, and move it into a more indigenous African religions, Caribbean, Caribbean religions context, which embraces the ancestors. I'm not saying that the Black church tradition American doesn't, but I think you're more using it in a more indigenous way in terms of an African church. So what I'm saying is your model is hard because you are shifting what is traditionally understood as Black church tradition and Black church experience from U.S. soil, and you're broadening it, and that troubles the water on one level, and then it troubles the water on another level spiritually. But I mean, you're using, I love the Bob Marley in his Exodus album captures the spirit of freedom inspired by Black awareness and Black awakening. And this jumped out at me because the Bob Marley movie came out yesterday. Right?
That's right.
So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so timely. We know where we're going. We know where we're from. We're leaving Babylon. We're going to our father's land. Exodus, movement of Jah people. You're bringing in Jah. You're bringing in Rastafarianism. You're bringing in Marcus Garvey. Rastafarianism, Marcus Garvey contested forms of Black religion in relationship to the American experience. So you are really troubling the waters in so many different ways, with shifting from this, what is often identified as the Black church experience and tradition based on American soil, to a movement. But at the same, as you're troubling, you're saying, but we still are very much connected because of, dislocation, because of migration, because of this common experience of enslaved peoples who were oppressed, whether you are thinking about it on U.S. soil or whether you're thinking about it in the colonial context, right? Which, that was all of, Bob Marley and, Redemption Song and Uprising, the many of the same themes, yet history and context makes a difference. So I guess, I don't know, I just wanted to say that because you trouble the water so much so that we got into a huge debate, a wonderful debate in class today, but it really is a troubling of the waters that is required and that is necessary and that is needed, but in many different ways.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that prior to the Great Awakening in America, 1740, 1750, and I would even say prior to maybe 1770s, Black folks in America weren't really into Christianity. They weren't really into the church. It's the Great Awakening that, folks used to go to those camp meetings and, started to sing their own songs and so on. And in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, we were steeped in Maya religion. We were steeped in religions of the spirit. We were steeped in New World stuff. We were talking about God in our own way. George Liele, who came to Jamaica 1783, was the first one. He came out of Savannah area and was one of the early preachers at the Silver Bluff Church way back in 1773, 74. So that might be the first church we had, first independent Black church. I mean, it started, in South Carolina on the border with Georgia there. So the American thing is kind of new. It's new. The roots aren't old. Like the Caribbean roots, those are old roots. Even at my baptism, in the, what was it, 1960s or so, 50s, Mother Brown reminded me that, boy, down at the riverside, you're going to meet the spirits of the ancestors down there. When the pastor dips you in the water, you got to come up to the spirit. I mean, they were into that stuff deep,
Right.
and so it enriches all of us if we can have some conversation, among us Africans in the diaspora.
Right.
But I think we have to go that way.
your one of your compelling questions in this book and Plantation Churches, where do you stand in relation to Africa? That's a loaded question when there has been distance for so many reasons from Africa. This embrace of, like, what aspects of Africa do you embrace? Is it okay to embrace with the Christianity practiced here and also in certain parts of the Caribbean, and South America, Central America? So yes, dipped and to come up and meet the ancestors, when some people feel like they're distanced from Africa.
Yeah. And if I can press that a bit further, from what Dr. Phillips was saying, Doc, I gotta say, really the first page in chapter 1, you come out swinging. And Nichole, I will say she summed it up well, because as soon as I read the first page of chapter 1, I was kind of challenged. And I'm going to get to a question that I wrote down as you were talking, but you named that of the 11 million Africans that were brought, of the 11 million Africans that were brought to the New World as enslaved persons, only about 450,000 ended up in the United States. And you make this note that more than 3 times went to Haiti. And I think that is significant, because when you ask that very next question on the very next page, what does it mean to do Black theology from a perspective of the Black majority? To tell you, as a Black man born and raised in the deep South of Mississippi, even coming through Candler and here, it was difficult to wrap my mind around that question. And it really wasn't, I think, until just a moment ago, in the exchange, I recognized that there's somewhat of an, and I don't know what other word to use, but I'll just use this one. There's somewhat of an entitlement that comes with thinking that Black theology and liberation began in the U.S.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
we want to, and you totally on the first page of chapter 1 told us that's probably not true. Can you talk us through how we deal with that kind of spirit of entitlement, especially with the rich history that we do have in the United States of lifting up Black theology and Black liberation?
It's so part and parcel of the North American experience, the sort of American exceptionalism. In America, everything is better, and everything is bigger, and everything is more grounded and more authentic and all of that. And you folks just got here. I mean, I almost want to say shit, you know what I'm saying? I mean, 1619, 1619. I mean, black folks struggling down there since 1501.
Wow.
I mean, we've been at this a long time, and the good news, though, that I touch on in one of the later chapters is that somehow through the middle passage, we're just being chained together and forced together in cramped space, and all of that the middle passage wasn't all negative, because somehow we connected. Somehow Black folks just connected, and it didn't matter whether you were shipped out to Trinidad or you're shipped out to Virginia. Somehow we recognized that we were one, and we would refer to each other as brother or sister, or sippy, as they call each other. We, uncle, and so on. So maybe as we dig deeper, we see that there's something organic there. We're organically connected. I mean, it's one spirit. It's really one Africa. But thanks to Garvey insisted on us, you know, realizing the importance of Africana.
I love it. Africana. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed.
This is I asked one question and the ball just got rolling.
Yes, you did it. You troubled the waters.
I troubled the waters, and we got some great responses out of it. And I kind of want to continue in that same vein a little bit. So we've kind of been talking about North America. We've been talking about some of our privilege, even in the way that we can see things. So, and this is for the entire panel and for you, Dr. Erskine. How can we sometimes see missionary theology or colonial theology in our society today, and how has it harmed communities?
That's deep. It was 2 nights ago, I think, Saturday night, we had a Black History Month thing for the Jamaican folks in Atlanta. Dozens of people turned up, and there was this gentleman who raised his hand. He said he attends a missionary church, a Methodist church here in, forgive me, a Methodist church in Atlanta. And he had a question for me. And he said, my church is now divided because we don't know what to make of it. We have some gay people in our church and some lesbian people in our church. And for a long time, the church taught us that gayness and lesbianism and all of that stuff was a sin. And now he said, the same church is trying to teach us that it's not a sin. And so I was trying to explain to him that that was part of the problem with the missionary ethos, that I had the same problem in Jamaica, and we still have it, not just had it, we still have it, where the missionaries came and they taught us that gayness was wrong and lesbianism was wrong and a sister shouldn't love another sister, brother, all that stuff. And now they're trying to tell us that it's not so. And the people are saying, what do we believe? You came and taught us this thing, and now you're teaching us another thing. So that's part of the confusion, I think, we're facing with the missionaries. And the problem is they do their thing and then they leave. And then you are left with dealing with that.
Would anyone else like to respond?
I'll hold it here and to kind of just piggyback on some of the things that Dr. Erskine has lifted as it relates to what we're discussing as missionary theology, things of that nature. I think white evangelicalism in Black churches, and then even expanding through missionary work, suggesting unto the other an inner-outer complex, which creates a dynamic where to some God is friend, but to the other, God is a foreigner. Mm-hmm. And I think from a psychological perspective, it has been harmful in a lot of ways to the most valuable, to one of the most valuable resources known to men and women, and that is the richness of human diversity. So even as I think about it now, wide-ranging ideas, human diversity is oftentimes, and Dr. Murray, you discuss the arrogance and at times even the posture of entitlement around, supreme arrogance to suggest or to assume the position of this way is the right way to think about it, or let us help these dark-skinned people do it, but they got to do it the white-skinned way. So again, fighting back the hounds of hell, as Howard Thurman would say, and really also looking internally. Dr. Erskine, your book called me in all of my parish work, to look internally on what my call is to fighting, egomania, and even a progressive church work, pseudo progressive church work, all for a name badge, in the name of just saying we're doing God's work to the highest degree. Because it's one thing to give resource, as it has been said. It's one thing to give a man or give a woman a fish, but it's another thing to actually care to teach the practices in practice as well. So thinking about that.
So, Krista, could you ask the question again about missionaries?
Yes. I asked, since we started talking about Northern American society and we started talking about that a bit more, how do we see missionary theology operating in our society today, and how has it harmed our churches?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump in before my sister.
Mm-hmm.
The dilemma is the missionaries preached what they termed a universal theology. They pretended that what they had was good for all times and all occasions and for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is they were passing on their culture
Mm-hmm.
and their private approach to salvation and God and all of that stuff. They were passing that on to us as universal.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought it. And embarrassing, I grew up in Jamaica, and it's embarrassing. I mean, the hymn book, the hymns we sang were out of England. I could sing the Te Deum Laudamus. I mean, that thing had about 50 verses, and we knew them all by heart.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even write our own songs. God bless Bob Marley and that generation and folks who started writing. We just sung out of the hymn book. And so it really stymied our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so the missionary forgot that the job of the missionary is to really work herself out of a job, is to equip us, to take over so that we can say, go on back home. We got this together now. Or as brother said earlier about the importance of having the Bible in patois, having the Bible in our own language.
Mm-hmm.
Before we had that for a long time, I knew that God understood when we prayed to him in patois, but I had never heard God speak in patois before I read the patois Bible. All this time, whenever God would speak to us in a dream or whatever, God spoke perfect English.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But now with the education, with the missionary left, and we translate our indigenous language, the Bible into our indigenous language, there was that aha moment. Thank God. Wait, God speaks. God speaks my dialect.
Mm-hmm.
God speaks my oh, what a revelation that was. People cried,
Mm-hmm.
to get that new revelation. And so it's important. It's important. Some good things. They started schools and so on. But it's important for the missionary to know when to leave so that people can carry on and build their own cultures.
There is a question in the chat that I want to turn our attention to quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It says, regardless of the context in which we consider our Blackness, we share connections across the diaspora. How do you all see Black theology and faith evolving in the next 20 years?
I think
I'll be dead and gone, so I'll let the younger folks talk. Go ahead. I won't be here.
Well, I think one way that it will evolve and continue to connect us is, I mean, one of the last chapters that Professor Erskine writes is on Black Lives Mattering, and so he the voices we have to movements are usually started and led by young people, right? So this listening to the voices and listening to the protests of young people around Black Lives Mattering. And the way Professor Erskine translated Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
is really at the heart of the movement, in that um, Black Lives Matters coalesced around the devaluation of Black lives and the killing of Black men and Black women, in majority Black men, but Black men and Black women, because of what do you call it? State sanctioned, let's say that,
Yeah.
state sanctioned killings of Black men and Black women, to the kind of taking us to George Floyd, which kind of precipitated not just a US movement, but the young people in the US precipitated a worldwide movement. But what is
That's right.
central to Black lives, which is what Professor Erskine points out, is um, is recognizing Black personhood, Black humanity, Black Black dignity, and valuing that. And so, if we can continue to hold on to that, I think, I mean, it will look different in different contexts. But I think that that is a centralizing feature of this Black theology and Black faith, recognizing that Black lives matter in many different ways. But central to all of that is reinforcing the humanity of Black folks.
Yeah.
Even if Black experiences differ based
Yes.
on, or are distinctive based on where you are located, because it's even distinctive regionally in the US. The southern Black experience is different from Northeastern, it's different from Midwestern, it's different from the far West, it's different from the West Coast. And so I think another feature, because Black theology and Black faith is also about defining Blackness. How do we define Blackness, and being okay with distinctions, being Black, but also being okay with different Black experiences, understanding that there are multitudes of Black
Yes.
experience. And can we hold that intention? There is not just one. There is not just one amongst African Americans. There is not just one amongst Caribbeans. There is not just one amongst South Americans, Central Americans. But what ties us together is Blackness. So that is the heart of this text, is causing us to wrestle with Blackness. And what does that mean?
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Dr. Mira, do you want to respond as well?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Doc. You say, Dr. Erskine, you say in chapter 6, Black Theology after James Cone, Jesus did not come among us in order to teach us how to be divine, but to help us restore our humanity and live as children of God with each other. That was so powerful to me, because in light of the question, I believe in the next 20 years, I think we'll see it sooner than that, that Black theology will and our faith will become more global. Dr. Phillips just alluded to it, but movements that begin in the United States will become global movements. Movements, I believe, that begin in certain parts of the Caribbean can become more global in nature, especially with the emergence of social media and everything else. So, these are becoming global issues. That's kind of the first thing. The second thing I will say is, I think when people get their hands on your book and really start to dive into the contents of it and start asking those very crucial questions that we've asked ourselves, and when this is taught broadly in the academy and even more deeper in the church, I think what's going to happen for folks who really want to learn more about Black theology and faith and liberation, I think it's gonna raise healthy questions. And what I mean by that is, folks who really want to learn and become a part of a movement aren't going to look at this and become what's the word? They aren't going to become threatened by the fact that history is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But no pun intended, they're going to be liberated to to become, I think, a part of, you know, what is becoming, we're seeing it before our eyes, kind of this global expression of Black theology. The last thing I will say, actually, two quick things. Thank you for raising the fact that within this work, how Garvey influenced King.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so often we want to hold on to, you know, King was this idealist around the beloved community and how things were. But no, to your point, near the end of his life, he became much more radical about changing systems, which obviously Garvey had an influence on. So I thank you for taking that step to raise that, because I think it's an important thing. My final comment is, in the sense of it becoming global, I believe that those of us who take seriously this call of Black theology and liberation are going to begin to challenge these power structures that white colonial theology, and you talk about the missionary question, have created and are still perpetuating. So you mentioned the Methodist Church. Right now, I am grieving the fact that so many of our African brothers and sisters are almost at the mercy and the whim of this colonial theology that I wrote this down. Church politicians disguised as missionaries going to these areas, trying to garner votes for a conference, under the guise of, we care about community, we want to be here for you, we want to help you build your churches, we want to, you know, develop programs, while at the very same time, that is becoming, in a real sense, a ploy to garner power. And I think we are raising up a generation that's going to have influence. It's going to pastor churches that have this influence to say this isn't going to continue to happen, and to challenge even our white brothers and sisters who are seeking to perpetuate this injustice. So I'll close my comments with there. But Doc, thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Dr. Erskine, did you have a response that you wanted to share before
Yes.
we close?
A last word. We must continue to pray, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We must continue to dream a new church, dream a new Emory, dream maybe even a new me, but dream we must, because, you know, the Bible talks about this new heaven and this new earth. 20 years, I see a new heaven and a new earth descending. Let's work towards that goal.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Erskine. I want to leave us all with a quote from chapter 7 that I think ties everything that we've talked about today. And it says, Black faith announces that in spite of human frailty and sin, the community of the oppressed is in God's hands, and it will not fail us. Yeah. And so for those who are listening, maybe this is your first time hearing about Black theology and Black faith. As we've all said, go get this book. There's links in the chat available to you. It's on Amazon. Dr. Erskine, once again, we're so grateful for your scholarship and for your work, and for partnering with us at the Foundry to offer these types of discussions. And so for everyone, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your questions and for your insights and for willing to just be transparent, you know, in this time. And so we're grateful. We thank all of you, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.